Sean Vincent Gillis. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, something was terribly wrong. Women were disappearing. Bodies were turning up in ditches, along roadsides, in remote stretches of swamp. And for years, investigators believed one man was responsible for all of it. They were wrong. There were two. Sean Vincent Gillis was born on June 24, 1962, the only child of Norman and Yvonne Gillis. His father, who struggled with severe mental illness and addiction, abandoned the family before Sean turned 2. Yvonne raised him alone, working at a local television station. On the surface, Sean appeared quiet and unremarkable. He attended Catholic schools, earned an IT certification, and drifted through convenience store jobs. But behind closed doors, he had developed deeply disturbing fixations from an early age. Neighbors later recalled a boy who unsettled other children in the area. Someone caught looking through windows at night and once found, in the early hours, beating garbage cans in a fit of rage because he could not find a girlfriend. As he grew older, the darkness only deepened. He became consumed by graphic content online, spending hours on websites depicting the worst imaginable acts. And in March of 1994, the same month he began dating a woman named Terry Lemoyne, Sean Vincent Gillis took his first life. But how does someone carry on a 10-year relationship while leading a completely separate existence? That is the question at the heart of this case. His first victim was 81-year-old Ann Bryan, found in her retirement home apartment on March 21, 1994. He had entered through an unlocked door and ended her life with a blade. Over the next decade, at least 7 more women would meet similar fates. 6 of his 8 confirmed victims were women working on the streets. But 2 stood out as chilling exceptions: Bryan, the elderly retiree, and Hardy Mosley Schmidt, a 52-year-old affluent jogger he had stalked for 3 weeks before strangling her with a cable. Gillis did not just take lives. He photographed what he did afterward. He kept digital files, more than 45 images of his victims in various states. He practiced necrophilia and cannibalism. And through all of it, Terry Lemoyne, the woman who shared his home, never once suspected. In fact, she once climbed into his car while the body of one victim, Joyce Williams, lay hidden in the back seat. On another occasion, she complained about a foul odor coming from his vehicle. It was Hardy Schmidt's remains decomposing in the trunk. He told her he had hit a squirrel. So how did this finally end? The investigation was unlike anything Baton Rouge had ever seen. 2 separate predators were operating in the same city at the same time, an almost unheard of situation. For years, every unsolved case was attributed to Derek Todd Lee, a man who was terrorizing the same region. After Lee was arrested in May of 2003, detectives began re-examining the evidence and realized something chilling. Several of the remaining unsolved cases did not match Lee's profile at all. The methods were different. The victims did not fit. Someone else was out there. A new multi-agency task force formed on March 3, 2004, after the body of 43-year-old Donna Bennett Johnston was discovered. What cracked the case was a set of Goodyear Aquatread tire tracks found at the scene. Only about 90 of those tires had been sold in the Baton Rouge area. Investigators painstakingly tracked down every buyer and began collecting DNA samples from each vehicle owner. It was slow, methodical work. But when they reached Gillis, his sample matched evidence recovered from multiple victims. After a decade, the net had finally closed. He was arrested on April 29, 2004, at 1:15 in the morning. Officers arrived at his mother's house on Bergen Avenue. When Gillis saw them, he looked at Terry and said, "Sorry, honey bunny." He then confessed to all 8 of his crimes without hesitation. Inside his home, investigators found newspaper clippings about Derek and Todd Lee. Gillis had been tracking his fellow predator for years, keeping a computer file titled DTL, viewing the two of them as competitors in some twisted rivalry only he understood. At trial in July 2008, prosecutor Prem Burns compared Gillis to Ted Bundy. The defense argued mental illness. The jury convicted him of the first-degree taking of Donna Bennett Johnston, but deadlocked 8-4 against the ultimate penalty. He later pleaded guilty to 2 additional counts in separate parishes. Today, Sean Vincent Gillis, now 63, sits in Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, locked in a cell 22 to 23 hours a day in preventive segregation, at his own request. No appeals are pending. Gillis managed to fool the one person closest to him for an entire decade. But the next case involves someone who fooled an entire city for 3. Dennis Rader. For 31 years, the city of Wichita, Kansas, lived under a shadow. Someone was entering homes, restraining families, and ending their lives. He called himself BTK, Bind, Torture, End. And while an entire city searched for a monster, the monster was attending church, coaching scouts, and measuring his neighbors' lawns with a tape measure. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, the eldest of 4 sons. His father, William, was a Marine veteran, his mother, Dorothea, a bookkeeper. From an early age, Rader developed disturbing private fixations that he would later describe in clinical detail. He graduated from Wichita Heights High School in 1963, served in the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1970, reaching the rank of Staff Sergeant, and later earned a bachelor's degree in Administration of Justice from Wichita State University. He married Paula Dietz on May 22, 1971. They had 2 children. For 34 years, Paula never suspected a thing. Rader worked at ADT Security Services from 1974 to 1988, installing alarm systems for clients who were terrified of the very man wiring their homes. He later became the compliance officer for Park City, Kansas, a petty bureaucrat known for citing residents over minor code infractions. Could the man measuring your grass really be the one responsible for the worst crimes in your city's history? In Wichita, the answer was yes. On January 15, 1974, Rader entered the home of the Otero family. Joseph Otero Sr., 38, and his wife Julie, 33, were both found lifeless that afternoon. 2 of their children were also taken that day. Rader would later refer to each of his crimes as a project, assigning them military-style code names. Over the next 17 years, he ended the lives of 6 more people. Catherine Bright in April 1974, Shirley Vian in March 1977, Nancy Fox in December 1977, Maureen Hedge in April 1985, Vicki Wegerly in September 1986, and Dolores Davis in January 1991. Throughout this period, Rader taunted police and media with letters, poems, and packages. He gave himself his name. He sent crime scene details only the person responsible would know. He once wrote, "How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper?" After Dolores Davis in 1991, he went silent for 13 years. But he never stopped thinking about what he had done. Then, in 2004, he resurfaced. After 13 years of silence, new letters arrived at police stations and newsrooms. Crime scene photographs were enclosed. Bound dolls were placed inside cereal boxes and left in public locations. Rader was desperate for attention again. And then came the question that would seal his fate. In January 2005, Rader left a hidden note asking police, could he communicate with a floppy disk without being traced? Police lied through a classified ad. Rex, it will be okay. On February 16, 2005, he sent a purple Memorex floppy disk to a local television station. Forensic examiner Randy Stone recovered deleted metadata from a Word document on the disk, a church meeting agenda, last modified by someone named Dennis at Christ Lutheran Church. A quick internet search confirmed that Dennis Rader was the church council president. A familial DNA comparison using a medical sample from his daughter Carrie confirmed the connection. On February 25, 2005, Rader was arrested while driving near his home. An officer asked him if he knew why he was being taken in. He replied, "Oh, I have suspicions why." On June 27, 2005, Rader pleaded guilty to all 10 counts. His hour-long courtroom confession was delivered in chillingly flat detail, describing each act as a project with no visible remorse. On August 18, 2005, Judge Gregory Waller sentenced him to 10 consecutive life terms, a minimum of 175 years before any possibility of release. Today, Rader is 80 years old, held at El Dorado Correctional Facility in solitary confinement, locked down 23 hours a day. His daughter Carrie reported in 2023 that he is wheelchair-bound, has lost several inches in height, and may have suffered a stroke in 2018. He remains a suspect in the 1976 disappearance of Cynthia Dawn Kinney in Osage County, Oklahoma. In May 2024, Carrie revealed a disturbing journal entry suggesting he had harmed members of his own family during childhood. His own arrogance, his belief that he was smarter than everyone around him, became the very thing that brought him down. Rader hid behind a badge, a church title, and a clipboard. But the next person on this list hid behind something even more disarming: a Santa Claus suit. Bruce MacArthur. In Toronto's church in Wellesley Village, men were vanishing. One by one, members of the city's LGBTQ community were disappearing without explanation. Families begged police to investigate. Community members warned that a predator was targeting them. For years, those warnings were dismissed. Thomas Donald Bruce MacArthur was born on October 8, 1951, in Lindsay, Ontario, and raised on a farm. He married his high school sweetheart, had 2 children, and lived as a closeted man until the early 1990s. After separating from his wife in 1997, he moved to Toronto and built a landscaping business called Artistic Design. In the neighborhood, he was known as a friendly, charming grandfather figure. During the holidays, he dressed up as Santa Claus at a local mall. What kind of person plays Santa for children by day and does unspeakable things by night? In 2001, MacArthur was involved in a serious incident where he harmed a man with an iron pipe. He pleaded guilty and received a conditional sentence. Then, in 2014, he obtained a record suspension that wiped his conviction from background checks. That decision would have devastating consequences. Between 2010 and 2017, 8 men connected to Toronto's LGBTQ community vanished. Skandaraj Navaratnam, 40, a Tamil refugee who had been MacArthur's former partner, disappeared in September 2010. Abdul Basir Faizi, 42, an Afghan immigrant who was married with daughters and living a closeted life, vanished in December of the same year. Majid Kaihan, 58, disappeared in October 2012. Sarush Mahmoodi, Kirushna Kumar Kanagaratnam, Dean Lisowick, Selim Essen, and Andrew Kinsman followed between 2015 and 2017. 2 of them were never even reported missing. MacArthur met his victims through the gay village, through dating apps like Grindr and Silver Daddies, and through his landscaping work. He strangled them in his apartment using a ligature, then dismembered the remains and buried them in large garden planters that he stored at a client's property at 53 Mallory Crescent in the quiet residential neighborhood of Leaside. He kept photographs of what he had done, posing victims and filing each image into labeled computer folders. Toronto police had launched Project Houston in November 2012 to investigate 3 linked disappearances. An anonymous tip even named MacArthur. Police interviewed him as a witness in 2013, but never checked his record. The project was shelved. In June 2016, MacArthur was arrested for choking a man in his van, but released without charges. His pardon conviction did not appear on any check. 2 more men were taken afterward. The break finally came with Project Prism, launched in August 2017 after Andrew Kinsman disappeared. A calendar in Kinsman's home had the name Bruce, written on June 26th. Detective David Dickinson cross-referenced a red Dodge Caravan seen on surveillance footage with vehicle registrations. Only one 2004 model belonged to someone named Bruce. Forensic examination of the van found traces linking it to Kinsman. On January 18, 2018, officers burst into MacArthur's apartment and made a discovery that confirmed everyone's worst fears. They found a man restrained and bound with a bag over his head. He was still alive, but minutes later, and the outcome would have been very different. MacArthur was immediately taken into custody and charged with first-degree counts for all 8 victims. Remains of 7 were painstakingly recovered from the planters at Mallory Crescent. The 8th was found in a nearby ravine. On January 29, 2019, MacArthur pleaded guilty to all 8 counts. Crown Prosecutor Michael Cantlin opened by stating that for years, community members believed they were being targeted. And they were right. MacArthur declined to address the court. On February 8, 2019, he was sentenced to life with no possibility of release for 25 years. At 73, the earliest he could ever be considered for release would be around 2043. An independent review titled Missing and Missed found deep institutional discrimination and issued 151 recommendations for reform. Toronto Police's interim chief publicly apologized for what he called inexcusable shortcomings. MacArthur used trust, charm, and a community's vulnerability to operate undetected for 7 years. But the next case predates the modern internet and involves someone who used the earliest days of the online world to lure victims across state lines. John Edward Robinson. Before dating apps, before social media, before most people even had email, one man was already using the earliest days of the internet to find, manipulate, and lure vulnerable women to their end. His hunting ground was not a street corner or a highway. It was a chat room. John Edward Robinson is widely considered the internet's first serial predator of this kind. Robinson was born on December 27, 1943, in Cicero, Illinois, the third of 5 children. As a teenager, he became an Eagle Scout and once performed before Queen Elizabeth II in London. But that promising start gave way to decades of fraud. He forged credentials to work as an X-ray technician. He embezzled $33,000 from a medical practice. He committed securities fraud. He even forged letters from the Kansas City mayor to fraudulently name himself Man of the Year. Between 1969 and 1982, he was arrested repeatedly, yet served only 60 days total behind bars. He married Nancy Jo Lynch in 1964 and had 4 children. On paper, he was a family man with a checkered past trying to go straight. He attended church. He coached Little League. He shook hands at neighborhood barbecues. In reality, the worst was yet to come. His first confirmed victim was 19-year-old Paula Godfrey, who disappeared on September 1, 1984, after being hired by one of Robinson's fraudulent companies. Her body has never been found. In January 1985, he lured Lisa Stacey, a 19-year-old mother, from a homeless shelter. Lisa vanished. Her infant daughter, Tiffany, was given to Robinson's own brother through forged adoption papers. The family had no idea the baby's mother had been taken. How does a man hand his own brother a stolen baby and sit across from him at Thanksgiving dinner for the next 15 years? That is the kind of person John Robinson was. Catherine Clampett, 27, disappeared in June 1987 after Robinson hired her. After serving time in the early 90s, Robinson discovered the internet. He created the persona Slave Master on AOL and BDSM chat rooms, targeting women with promises of jobs, money, and relationships. Beverly Bonner, 49, a prison librarian who fell for Robinson during his incarceration, vanished around January 1994. He cashed her alimony checks for years. Sheila Dale Faith, 45, and her daughter Debbie, who used a wheelchair, both disappeared in 1994. Robinson collected Sheila's disability payments for 7 years, totaling $97,000. Isabella Lewicka, a young Polish immigrant, vanished in the summer of 1999 after signing a 115-item contract Robinson had drawn up. His final confirmed victim was Suzette Troughton, 27, a licensed practical nurse lured from Michigan with the promise of a $62,000 job. She disappeared on March 1, 2000. The unraveling began when Troughton's mother grew suspicious of typewritten letters, supposedly from her daughter. Suzette could not type well and was a poor speller. There was no way she had written those letters. Her mother knew something was deeply wrong. Detective David Brown of the Lenexa Police began connecting Robinson to multiple missing women. Simultaneously, 2 women came forward and filed complaints against him. Robinson was arrested on June 2, 2000, at his Olathe, Kansas mobile home park. Searches of his Lacine, Kansas farm and a Missouri storage unit revealed 5 55 to 85-gallon chemical barrels containing remains. 3 victims' bodies have never been recovered. His Kansas trial in October 2002, the longest in state history, resulted in a conviction on all counts. On January 21, 2003, he was sentenced to the ultimate penalty for 2 of the crimes and life for a third. In Missouri, he pleaded guilty to 5 additional counts and received 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of release. Robinson, now 81, remains on death row at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. The state has not carried out an execution since 1965, creating a de facto moratorium. He filed for post-conviction relief in 2022, arguing ineffective counsel. The Kansas Supreme Court upheld his sentence in a landmark 415-page ruling in November 2015. And the nation's highest court declined to review the case in 2016. Robinson exploited the earliest corners of the internet to target women no one was looking for. But the next case required no technology at all. Just a camera phone, a shallow grave, and a family that trusted the wrong person completely. Chris Watts. On August 13, 2018, Shanann Watts did not show up for a doctor's appointment. She did not answer her phone. She did not respond to any of the dozens of messages from friends who had been expecting her that morning. Her car was still in the garage. Her shoes were still by the door. And when her friend Nicole Atkinson arrived at the house and no one answered the door, she immediately called the police. Something was wrong. Nicole could feel it. What followed would become one of the most closely watched cases in modern history. Christopher Lee Watts was born on May 16, 1985, in Spring Lake, North Carolina. He met Shanann Razuchek in 2010 through Facebook, and they married on November 3, 2012. The couple moved into a 5-bedroom home at 2825 Saratoga Trail in Frederick, Colorado. They had 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. Chris worked as an oil field operator at Anadarko Petroleum. Shanann was an active promoter for the Thrive Wellness brand, documenting their seemingly perfect family life in daily social media videos. To everyone watching, the Watts family was living the American dream. But what happens when the person you trust most in the world is the one you should fear? In June 2018, Chris began an affair with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger. On the night of August 12th, Shanann returned home at 1:48 in the morning from a business trip. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a son they had planned to name Nico. Chris told her he wanted a separation. What happened next would shatter everything. Chris strangled Shanann in their bed. He then loaded her body and their 2 living daughters into his work truck and drove 45 minutes to CERVI 319, a remote Anadarko oil site. Both girls were smothered and placed inside crude oil tanks. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave nearby. In a later full confession on February 18, 2019, he described the final moments in devastating detail. In 2021 letters, he admitted he had planned everything for weeks. The unraveling was remarkably swift. Within 12 hours, Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson triggered a welfare check. Neighbor Nathan Trinastich's security camera captured Chris loading his truck before dawn, proving Shanann never left the house alive. During a television interview the next day, Chris pleaded for his family's return while repeatedly speaking about them in the past tense. He failed a polygraph on August 15th and initially tried to claim that Shanann had harmed the children and that he had acted in response. Investigators did not believe a word of it. That story collapsed almost immediately under questioning. He confessed and was arrested the same day, just 2 days after the events took place. Bodies were recovered on August 16th at the Cervi oil site. On November 6, 2018, Watts pleaded guilty to all 9 charges, including 3 first-degree counts, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with remains. The ultimate penalty was removed at the explicit request of Shanann's family. On November 19, 2018, Judge Marcelo Kopkow sentenced him to 5 life terms without the possibility of release, plus 84 years, calling it perhaps the most inhumane act he had ever seen. Shanann's father, Frank, stood in the courtroom and addressed Watts directly. "You heartless monster. You carried them out like trash." Today, Watts is 40 years old, incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, working as a custodian in general population. He claims to have found faith and says he has been forgiven in letters written from behind bars. He keeps photos of his family in his cell. He has received love letters from women across the country. The Watts home at 2825 Saratoga Trail sold for $650,000 in October 2024. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Chris Watts destroyed his family to start a new life. But the next case involves a man who held one of the highest military ranks in his country and used that authority to cover his tracks in ways most people could never imagine. Russell Williams. He flew the Queen of England. He flew the Prime Minister. He commanded Canada's largest and busiest military airbase. And in his spare time, he was breaking into homes, stealing undergarments, and photographing himself wearing them. His name was Colonel Russell Williams, and his fall from grace remains one of the most shocking in Canadian history. David Russell Williams was born on March 7, 1963, in Bromsgrove in England. His family emigrated to Canada when he was young. His parents divorced when he was 6. He attended the elite Upper Canada College, studied economics at the University of Toronto, and joined the Canadian Forces in 1987. His rise through the military was nothing short of extraordinary. He piloted V-1P transport aircraft for royalty and heads of state. He commanded 437 Transport Squadron. He oversaw Camp Mirage in the United Arab Emirates, supporting operations in Afghanistan. And in July 2009, he was named Wing Commander of Canadian Forces Base Trenton. He married Mary Elizabeth Harriman, an Associate Director of the Heart and Stroke Foundation. He was childless, disciplined, and by all outward appearances, a model officer and a model citizen. But beneath the uniform was a man living an entirely separate existence. How does someone entrusted with the security of an entire nation simultaneously become its worst nightmare? Williams' crimes followed a clear escalation. Between 2007 and 2009, he committed 82 documented break-ins at 47 homes, stealing approximately 1,400 pieces of underwear and lingerie. He photographed himself wearing the stolen items and cataloged everything with military precision. He once typed a message on a young person's computer during a break-in. In September 2009, he escalated further. He broke into 2 homes near his Tweed cottage and harmed 2 women, blindfolding and photographing both. Then came November. Corporal Marie-France Como, 37, a military flight attendant who served under Williams' command, was found in her Brighton, Ontario home on November 23, 2009. Williams had suffocated her with duct tape. The next day, he attended a United Way fundraiser on base. He later sent an official condolence letter to her father. Can you imagine receiving a letter of sympathy from the very person responsible for taking your daughter's life? On the night of January 28, 2010, 27-year-old Jessica Lloyd was taken from her Belleville home. Williams held her captive, then ended her life the following day. He dumped her body in woods near Tweed, and then he did something almost beyond comprehension. He authorized search and rescue aircraft from CFB Trenton to search for his own victim. Military planes flew overhead, looking for a woman whose fate their commander already knew. The investigation turned on a roadblock. On February 4, 2010, the Ontario Provincial Police set up a checkpoint on Highway 37. Williams was stopped in his Nissan Pathfinder. The tire treads matched tracks found at Jessica Lloyd's home. 3 days later, Detective Staff Sergeant Jim Smith sat across from Williams in what would become one of the most studied interrogations in criminal justice history. Over 10 hours, Smith methodically dismantled the colonel's composure. He addressed him as Russell, never Colonel, deliberately stripping away the rank and authority Williams had hidden behind for years. Williams initially asked, "Can I assume you're going to be discreet?" This would have a very significant impact on the base. Even in that moment, his first concern was not the victims. It was his reputation. By 7:45 that evening, confronted with irrefutable bootprint evidence and tire impressions that placed his vehicle at the scene, Williams broke. He confessed to everything. He pleaded guilty on October 18, 2010, to all 88 charges. On October 21st, Justice Robert F. Scott sentenced him to 2 life terms with no possibility of release for 25 years. The Governor General revoked his commission. His uniform was burned. His medals were cut to pieces. His commission scroll was shredded. His Pathfinder was crushed. The Canadian military wanted every trace of him erased. Williams, now 62, is held at Port Cartier Institution, a maximum security federal prison in Quebec. He attempted to take his own life in custody using a makeshift method. His divorce from Harriman was finalized in 2014. He still receives a military pension of approximately 60,000 Canadian dollars a year. Parole eligibility arrives in 2035, but given the nature of what he did, release is considered virtually impossible. Williams used rank, authority, and a decorated career to hide in plain sight. But the next case involves someone who did not need power or position, just a map, a basement, and an internet connection. Maury Travis. In the early 2000s, women were vanishing from the streets of North St. Louis. Their bodies were turning up along roadsides, in alleys, and in open fields across both Missouri and Illinois. For investigators, there were few leads. The victims were marginalized women, many of them struggling with addiction, and their disappearances initially drew little attention. But someone was watching closely, and he was keeping records. Maury Troy Travis was born on October 25, 1965, in St. Louis, Missouri. He grew up in the Carr Square housing projects before his family moved to a ranch house at 1001 Ford Drive in Ferguson. Neighbors described him as quiet and helpful. a man who kept to himself and never caused trouble. He attended local schools and joined the Army Reserves. He later enrolled at Morris Brown College in Atlanta. But a growing substance dependency derailed his education. He robbed 5 shoe stores using a toy weapon, was convicted, and served roughly 3.5 years. After his release around 2000, he found work as a waiter at the Mayfair Hotel in St. Louis. From the outside, Travis looked like a man who had made mistakes, paid his debt, and was putting his life back together. But inside his home, behind a locked door, the truth was horrifying. Travis was conclusively linked to 12 lives taken between approximately 2000 and 2002. Though he claimed 17, and investigators believe the real number may exceed 20, he targeted women along Broadway in North St. Louis, luring them with the promise of substances. He brought them back to his Ferguson home, to a room behind a locked door that investigators would later describe as a chamber of horrors. The room was painted blue with dark carpeting. A wooden beam had been installed for restraining victims. Inside, investigators found bondage equipment, a stun device, and over 1,000 samples of evidence matching at least 6 different victims. Hidden behind a bookshelf were VHS tapes. One was labeled "Your Wedding Day." The tapes showed Travis bringing women into the room, offering them substances, and then filming what happened next. In at least one recording, he could be heard declaring it was his first time. The footage was so disturbing that Police Chief Joe Mokwa ordered mandatory counseling for every officer who viewed it. What kind of person labels a tape of the worst imaginable acts with the title of a celebration? And how was he finally caught? In May 2002, Travis made a critical mistake. He sent an anonymous letter to St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter Bill Smith. Inside the envelope was a printed map with an X marking the location of a body. The FBI traced the map to Expedia.com, which at the time was powered by Microsoft's mapping service. Microsoft's records showed that only one computer had zoomed into the specific area of West Alton, Missouri, between May 18th and 21st. The IP address was tracked through the internet service provider WorldCom to an account registered under the name Maury Travis, belonging to Maury Troy Travis of Ferguson, Missouri. This was one of the first cases in history where internet forensics were used to identify a predator of this nature. On June 7, 2002, officers arrived at his home at 7 in the morning. Travis answered the door in boxer shorts. When told that the map had given him away, he became irate. He initially offered to lead police to another victim's location, but changed his mind while they were driving. 3 days later, on June 10, 2002, Travis was found unresponsive in his cell at the St. Louis County Justice Center. He had used a bedsheet. He was on watch at the time, but 2 consecutive 15-minute checks had been missed. A note to his mother read, "I've been sick for a long time, sick in the head, since I was 14. He was 36 years old. He took the identities of his remaining victims with him. In July 2025, a breakthrough finally came. 3 previously unidentified victims, Kelly Johnson, Crystal Lay, and Carol Jean Hemphill, were identified through investigative genetic genealogy by Illinois State Police and students at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. More than 2 decades after their lives were taken, their names were finally spoken aloud. Travis gave himself away with a printed map and an internet connection. But the next case unfolded over more than 2 decades, across 3 different periods of someone's life, and the evidence was buried in the most unthinkable place. Robert Lee Yates. In Spokane, Washington, during the late 1990s, women were being found along roadsides and in wooded areas with plastic grocery bags placed over their heads. 2 bags, sometimes 3 or 4, layered on top of each other. The press called whoever was doing this the grocery bag predator. And for years he operated freely, because no one suspected the decorated military pilot who lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood with his wife and 5 children. Robert Lee Yates Jr. was born on May 27, 1952, in Oak Harbor, Washington. His family carried its own darkness. His grandmother had taken his grandfather's life with an axe in 1945, years before Robert was born. He enlisted in the United States Army in 1977 and became a helicopter pilot, flying the OH-58D Kiowa. He served in Desert Storm, Somalia, and Haiti, rising to Chief Warrant Officer 4 with the Master Aviator Badge and over 5,000 flight hours. He married Linda Brewer in 1976. They had 5 children. To every neighbor, every fellow churchgoer, every colleague on base, Robert Yates was a good man. But how far back does someone's darkness really go? In this case, the answer is staggering. Yates's confirmed history stretches back to 1975, when 2 college students, Patrick Oliver, 21, and Susan Savage, 22, were found near Walla Walla. They had been shot while picnicking. In 1988, 23-year-old Stacy Hahn was taken in a similar manner. But the primary spree came between 1996 and 1998 in Spokane, when Yates ended the lives of 13 women, most of them working along East Sprague Avenue. He also shot Christine Smith in the head, but she survived. His method was consistent. He used a .25 caliber Raven pistol, shooting every victim in the head. He then covered their faces with plastic grocery bags before disposing of the bodies. But the most chilling discovery of all came after his confession. The remains of victim Melody Murfin were found buried beneath the bedroom window of the Yates family home. His wife and children had been sleeping just feet away from a shallow grave they never knew existed. What would you do if you found out the person you had shared a home with for 20 years had buried someone beneath your window? The Spokane Homicide Task Force had been working the case as bodies accumulated. Key evidence included DNA, linking multiple victims to a single individual, and a white 1977 Corvette seen with victim Jennifer Joseph. Carpet fibers from that Corvette matched trace evidence found on Joseph's body. A white button from her blouse was recovered from the vehicle. Detectives had nearly identified the car earlier, but a field report had mistakenly recorded Camaro instead of Corvette, delaying the connection. Yates was arrested on April 18, 2000, while driving to his job at Kaiser Aluminum. What followed were 2 separate legal proceedings in 2 jurisdictions with very different outcomes. In Spokane County, in October 2000, Yates pleaded guilty to 13 counts and 1 attempted count to avoid the ultimate penalty, receiving 408 years in consecutive sentences. But Pierce County refused to honor that agreement and tried him separately for the lives of Melinda Mercer and Connie LaFontaine Ellis. He was convicted in September 2002 and received the harshest sentence available on October 3rd of that year. In October 2018, the Washington Supreme Court ruled the state's method of carrying out that sentence unconstitutional. Yates's punishment was commuted to life without the possibility of release. Governor Inslee signed legislation in April 2023 formally abolishing that practice in Washington state. Yates, now 73, remains at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. He will never leave. Yates hid behind a military career, a family, and a church pew for over 2 decades. But the next case shows how an entire city's failure to protect its most vulnerable residents allowed one man to operate for even longer. Lonnie Franklin Jr. For more than 20 years, women were being found in the alleys and side streets of South Los Angeles. They were covered with mattresses, debris, and trash. They were left in places where people would not look, in neighborhoods where people felt their voices were not heard. And while community members pleaded with law enforcement to take the pattern seriously, one man went on living his life just blocks away, fixing cars for his neighbors and attending family barbecues. Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was born on August 30th, 1952, in Los Angeles. He served in the United States Army in Germany, but received a dishonorable discharge in 1975 after being convicted of a serious offense against a young woman overseas. Back in Los Angeles, he worked briefly at an LAPD garage in 1981 and then as a City of Los Angeles refuse collector from 1982 to 1989. He married Sylvia Castillo, had 2 children, and became known in the Manchester Square neighborhood as a friendly mechanic who fixed cars for cheap. How does a man with a dishonorable discharge and a history of harming others end up working for the city, living quietly in a neighborhood and going undetected for 2 decades? That is the question that haunted South LA for years. Between 1985 and 2007, Franklin took the lives of at least 10 women and shot 1 more who survived. He targeted vulnerable young black women during the height of the crack epidemic, using a .25 caliber pistol at close range and dumping their bodies in alleys covered with whatever he could find. His timeline included a 14-year apparent break between 1988 and 2002, a gap that earned him the nickname the Grim Sleeper, a term coined by LA Weekly journalist Christine Pelisek in 2008. His victims ranged from 15-year-old Princess Berthamew to 35-year-old Valerie McCorvey. The sole survivor, Enietra Washington, was shot in the chest, harmed, and photographed with a Polaroid camera before being pushed from a moving vehicle. That single Polaroid photograph would be found 22 years later, hidden behind a wall inside Franklin's garage. One photograph, hidden for 22 years. And it was not the only thing investigators found inside that house. For years, crime scene DNA had no direct match in any database. Investigators were stuck. Then, in 2008, California authorized a new technique, familial DNA searching. It was a game changer. Franklin's son Christopher was convicted on a felony weapons charge, and his DNA entered the state system. A familial search in June 2010 flagged the partial match. The partial hit pointed investigators toward a relative, and from there, toward the father, but they still needed a direct sample. An undercover detective, disguised as a busboy at a family birthday party held at John's Incredible Pizza, quietly collected Franklin's discarded pizza crust, a fork, napkins, and a piece of cake from his table. The DNA was a perfect match. Franklin was arrested on July 7, 2010, outside his home. Inside, police found 3 .25 caliber handguns, the Enietra Washington Polaroid, and more than 1,000 photographs of women, many of them unclothed, unconscious, or possibly no longer alive. Over 35 women in those photographs have never been identified. At trial in early 2016, prosecutor Beth Silverman called Franklin a predator hiding in plain sight who discarded his victims the same way he was paid to collect refuse. Enietra Washington took the stand and identified him in court, face to face, more than 2 decades after the night he shot her and left her for gone. The jury deliberated for just a day and a half before convicting on all counts. On August 10, 2016, exactly 31 years after his first confirmed victim was found, Franklin received the harshest sentence available. Judge Kathleen Kennedy told him she could not think of anyone she had encountered who had committed crimes as monstrous as his. Franklin passed away on March 28, 2020, at San Quentin at the age of 67, from apparent cardiovascular disease. He never revealed additional victims. He never explained the 14-year gap. And those 35 women in the photographs found inside his home remain unidentified to this day. Franklin hid behind a neighborhood's trust and a city's neglect for over 20 years. But the final case on this list is perhaps the most unsettling of all, because this man did not just live near his victims, he lived next door. Michael Gargiulo. What if the most dangerous person in your life was not a stranger, but the neighbor who fixed your heater, who waved at you in the hallway? Who knew your schedule better than you did? Michael Thomas Gargiulo lived within 1 block of every single person he ever targeted. He did not stalk from the shadows. He moved in next door. Gargiulo was born on February 15, 1976, in Glenview, Illinois. During the penalty phase of his trial, testimony revealed severe mistreatment during childhood. He was reportedly confined and deprived of food and water for extended periods as a toddler, while older siblings wore masks to frighten him. He attended Glenbrook South High School, where he played football alongside a teammate named Doug Piccaccio. Doug had a sister. Her name was Tricia. She would become the first name on a list that stretched across 2 states and 15 years. On August 13, 1993, 18-year-old Tricia Piccaccio was found on the doorstep of her family's Glenview home. She had been stabbed 12 times. Gargiulo, who was 17 at the time, lived just 1 block away. The case went cold. Gargiulo left Illinois and moved to the Los Angeles area, where he found work as an air conditioning repairman. Friends called him Mike the Furnace Man. He was friendly, helpful, and always willing to lend a hand. On February 21, 2001, 22-year-old Ashley Ellerin was found in her Hollywood home. She had been stabbed 47 times and was nearly decapitated. That night, she had a date with rising actor Ashton Kutcher, who arrived at her home at 10:30 that evening, knocked repeatedly, and saw what he believed was red wine spilled on the floor through a window. He left. The next day, he learned the truth. Gargiulo had repaired Ellerin's heater just days earlier. He lived nearby. Would you ever suspect the person who just fixed your furnace? On December 1, 2005, 32-year-old Maria Bruno was found in her El Monte apartment. She had been stabbed 17 times. Gargiulo lived in the same apartment complex. On April 28, 2008, 26-year-old Michelle Murphy was attacked in her Santa Monica home and stabbed 8 times. But Murphy fought back. She survived. And Gargiulo, who lived directly across the alley, cut himself during the struggle. He left his own evidence at the scene. DNA from the scene matched Gargiulo. Police discovered he lived across the alley from Murphy. Santa Monica investigators then connected him to the Bruno case through a matching blue bootie found at both the crime scene and his former apartment. He was arrested on June 6, 2008. A remarkable cross-jurisdictional breakthrough had actually occurred years earlier. In 2002, when LAPD detectives investigating Ellerin and Cook County cold case detectives investigating Piccaccio independently discovered they were both looking for the same man. Gargiulo's DNA matched material found under Tricia Piccaccio's fingernails. But Cook County prosecutors initially declined to press charges. It was not until 2011, after CBS's 48 Hours aired the story, that 2 former colleagues came forward saying Gargiulo had confessed to them about harming a girl back in Illinois. Cook County filed charges in July 2011. The California trial began on May 2, 2019. Prosecutors called Gargiulo a serial, psychosexual, thrill-seeking predator. Ashton Kutcher took the stand on May 29, 2019, testifying for about 40 minutes. He described arriving at Ellerin's home that night and his horror the following day, saying his fingerprints were on the door and he was panicking. Gargiulo was convicted on August 15, 2019, on all counts. The jury recommended the harshest sentence on October 18, 2019. The formal sentence was imposed on July 16, 2021. Gargiulo addressed the court and declared he was innocent, claiming he had been framed by detectives. On September 6, 2024, he was extradited to Cook County, Illinois, for his first appearance on the Piccaccio charge. He appeared using a cane and wearing dark sunglasses. Judge Anthony Calabrese ordered him detained. If convicted in Illinois, he faces life without the possibility of release. The Illinois proceeding remains pending. California's sentence stands, but is subject to a moratorium. The state has not carried out an execution since 2006. Prosecutor Dan Ackerman perhaps summed it up best when he told the jury that for almost 15 years, Gargiulo had been watching, always watching. He was not hiding in the shadows. He was standing in the light right next door, waiting. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.